years earlier against Carl Thompson. Everybody wrote me off and said, well, I didn't have what it takes to get to the very top. But, I went behind closed doors. I sort of moved to North Cyprus for a couple of years to really get my head down, no distractions. And, when the opportunity came to go over to Levallois on the outskirts of Paris to fight this guy who, I think he'd only lost one fight in 10 years, and he actually got revenge on that fight. So he was the number one in the division, the Ring Magazine champion, WBC, WBA. He won the IBF. He had that stripped right before he fought me. So he was the man to beat. And he had a style that I had always struggled with. He was very short, very compact, didn't give you much room to punch. So I had to kind of adapt my style for his style. And it worked a treat. He knocked me down in the fourth round, but strangely, I actually prepared. I knew there was a strong chance he could knock me down. So I used to do roly-polies in the gym to get really dizzy and then do my pad work with Adam Booth. And it worked. I remember getting knocked down and thinking, okay, practice this. I knew this was a chance. So I know I've lost around 10-8. Just kill the clock to the end of the round, regroup and come back in round 5. And that's exactly what I did. I came back in round 5, and the plan was from round 7 onwards to round 12, just to start picking the pace up, not to have too much of a punch out at early doors, but save it to the second half of the fight. And strangely, in round 7, when I did pick it up, I managed to knock him out. And for me, that was one of the biggest highlights of my career.
You spoke about the roly-polies. Yeah. You literally used to fall onto the canvas and spin around.
Yeah,
Tell us
exactly.
more about that.
Yeah, it was a way, in the past I've been hit with shots, I've been hurt with shots. I think in my 7th fight, I fought a guy called Lenga Mock. I got hit on the chin, and all I remember was just my head spinning. It was like, we know when you do the party trick where you got a broom going round and round it onto your head and you fall over. It felt like that in the ring. So I thought, I need to replicate this feeling. So when it happens again, it's not alien to me. So I did it in the roly-poly, spinning around, and then I had to hold my faculties together as I wanted to fall over. As you see any big fighter gets hit on the chin. I remember Mike Tyson fought Trevor Berbick. You get up too fast, you fall back down. It's just like your head spinning. So I needed to regroup, one knee on the floor, count when it gets around. When the count gets to 7, 8, stand up, and then keep going. And I practiced it, and it worked. It really, really worked. I'm really fortunate that I implemented that in my training program. So come fight night, when the worst happened, when you get nailed by the champion on foreign territory, it was a Don King promotion. So I knew if it went the distance, the chances of me winning in Paris, being an Englishman, were pretty much zero. And I think I was down on the cards as well when I knocked him out. So everything sort of came together. All the lessons I learned early in my career, proved worthwhile. And I was then the number one in the division, number one, the only ever unified cruiserweight champion from Britain.
You gave us a glimpse into who Jean-Marc Mormec was just a moment or so ago. But this was a man who'd only been beaten once in the previous 10 years by O'Neill Bell and had avenged that defeat. So, in effect, he'd beaten everyone he'd faced in the last 10 years. So when you assess that kind of opponent, what's the ratio of fear to excitement? And does it change from day to day, from hour to hour?
I always just knew he had the worst style for my style. Anytime I'd struggled in fights or struggled in sparring, it was people who had his style. And I fought a guy called Jacob Fragameni for the final eliminator for the WBC title it was, and at York Hall, Bethnal Green, and I had a real tough night. He was like a weaker version of Mormec. He was a little bit shorter, he was a little bit lighter, he wasn't as big, he wasn't as tough. And he really pushed me hard. He cut my eye. It was another one of those crazy fights where I had to really go soul searching. I managed to pull the victory back, I think, in round 9. But I then knew, moving forward, I was going to have to fight a guy who had a very similar style, that was bigger, stronger, more consistent, had fought better fighters, was a world champion. And that was the only way I was going to get the respect from the world's boxing fans and media. So I thought, I need to do this. So I literally moved out of London, and because I knew I couldn't live the life I was living and expect to get the very best out of myself. And it really worked out. So me and Adam Booth moved to North Cyprus for literally a couple of years because we knew the challenge that I had ahead of me. What was too vast for me to kind of live the life I was living in London with my friends and family around and going out, and I just had to really kind of separate myself from it. And we built a gym in the middle of nowhere, and we just worked every day, and it really paid dividends.
You spoke there about Adam Booth. I seem to remember in commentary on 5 Live, we went across to the corner at one stage and he was mentioning the number of punches as if that had been part of the plan.
It was, I really wanted to keep a low punch out, but people didn't quite understand what we were talking about. Like, for me to be competitive in a round but only throw 20 punches, it shows that I was controlling the range, controlling the distance, controlling the movement. Whereas if I was competitive in a round and threw 100 punches, I knew I was only controlling it with my punches. And in fights, you need to maintain, you need to hold in reserve the big punches for the second half of the fight. So the plan was to throw as few punches in the early rounds, allowing Mormek to use his punches. So come the halfway point, you then step it up to 50, 60 punches a round. And it messes his game plan up, messes his rhythm up, his timing, and I can then pull away. And soon as I then increased the punch output, I knocked him out in the 7th round. So it was something I've been working on in sparring, and I still do it now. I only punch when I need to punch, when I have to punch. It's something I've kind of reintroduced into my style of late. But it was something that watching his fights, he was a leech. He used to, because he didn't move his head that much, because he allowed you to hit him because he was so tough, people got drunk on their success. So people could land 100 punches in the first round, 100 punches in the second round, 150 punches in the third round, but they don't realise it's a 12-round fight. And he is only throwing 5 or 6 punches in those rounds. So you might win the first 3 rounds, but come round 4, 5 and 6, he starts taking over. He goes to 20 punches. You can't maintain 100 punches, and he takes over. So we studied his punch output, studied my punch output, and kind of topsy-turvied it on him and sort of used his style against him. And because I wasn't throwing so many punches, it allowed him to throw more punches, which is something he didn't ordinarily do. So he managed to sort of do the old switcheroo on him, and it worked out perfect.
But see, all of this seems to be underpinned by experience, David, because you've mentioned only 2 other opponents here, Thompson, who beat you, and Fragamani, who could have beaten you. So all of that was used as the platform for learning and putting into practice exactly what you've just said.
Yeah, it's hard sometimes to learn. If I walk out there and knock somebody out in one round with one shot, what do you learn about that other than you punch hard? And I know I punch hard. I always punch hard since I was a kid. You learn the best lessons I found in life for adversity when things aren't going your way, or when you've got to change the game plan. So a lot of the fights that I've learned the most in are the fights that I've either lost or really struggled with. The fights where I've won easy, I didn't. It's just a pat on the back for me, really. So I believe I've learned a lot over the years. I've had so many different situations, against southpaws, big guys, short guys, heavy guys. I've been in the ring either in fights or in sparring with so many different types of styles and different sort of personalities. I really believe it. At 37 years old now, as you said, 10 years since, 10 years next month since the Mormek fight. I've got so much of a wealth of knowledge that when it comes time for getting back in the ring now, I feel so much more confident that I can find a way to win.
Back then, you're working with Frank Maloney as a promoter. I remember in the hotel on the evening of the fight, you were there at about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And I came in, I don't know where I'd been, but I saw Frank Maloney in the lobby, and he said to me, and he whispered because you were nearby, almost in earshot, he said, I wish he'd go back to his room and relax.
Yeah.
But everybody has their own way of dealing with those last almost aching hours until the first bell rings.
Yeah, I've always been quite out and about. I always like it. I like to talk to people. I like to see how they're feeling. I understand boxing is entertainment, and I've always liked to, before a fight, see how's everyone feeling. Are you excited? What are you excited about? I don't know why that is, but I like to be around people. Obviously the last couple of hours prior to the fight, I sort of lock myself away and get in the zone. But prior to a fight, I like to just talk to people and see how they're feeling and ask them how excited they are. What do they want to see? What do they expect to happen? And I just like talking about the fight because I enjoy boxing. I'm still a boxing fan. And even fights I'm going into, like now, my big fight against Tony Bellew. I love talking to people about say, did you like the first fight? What did you like about the first fight? What do you think's going to happen in the second fight? I love talking about it to people because I know come fight night, everyone's interest is going to be there. Millions of people around the world are going to be tuning in, and everyone's got an opinion about this this big rematch I'm having with Bellew. And I love to be in fights that people care about. I've had the fights where no one's ever heard of the opponent, and it's not why I'm in the boxing. So it's hard to have an opinion about someone you've never heard of. It could be Carlos Takam, it could be even Pulev. Nobody really knew who Pulev. I can barely remember what his first name is, and I'm in the heavyweight division. So, but if Josh was to fight a David Haye or a Tony Bellew or maybe even a Deontay Wilder, it will then get the juices flowing, and that's why I'm in boxing. I'm in boxing to get the fights, particularly at this stage of my career, that people genuinely want to see.
And the fight against Mormek was unbelievably exciting, because we can fast forward to the 7th round when you turn it round with an amazing right hand, and he fell face first, and you pretty often know that when they fall face first they do not get up. But how close was that to the greatest punch you've ever thrown? It was
I'd thrown a few body shots which I saw in his eyes that he felt. And that was part of the plan to kind of bring because you've got this crab-like defence where it's pretty much impenetrable, and you've got to really work for every single punch. And I really started focusing on the body to try to draw his hands down, and then I then changed my stance, switched southpaw, and then switched back to orthodox. And as I switched, I then threw a punch at the same time, and it hit him on the sweet spot. He then clammed up. I then threw a big uppercut through the middle, which sort of glanced his chin, and he thought about going down. And the moment he sort of thought about going down, I then hit him sort of a big old right hook round the back of the ear, and that was it. It was good night. He bravely got to his feet, but the referee would have given him all the chances in the world to carry on, but he would have got flattened, and there was no argument from Mormek after that. He realised that he'd been bettered on that night. It was a tough night at the office, but I'd say it was one of my finest hours.
And you fought only once more at cruiserweight. So can you remember what you had to go through to make the weight limit back then?
It was the Mormek fight was a little bit more difficult than the Macronelli fight, which I had, I think, 4 months basically to the day after, and I just made sure I didn't let myself go between fights. After the Mormek fight, I went straight. I think I had a week off. I went straight back into training. I went over to Miami where the weather was a little bit warmer, and did the remainder of the camp in Miami, where I got a good sparring, and I felt I was like 2 pounds under the weight limit against Mormek. So there was a bit of gamesmanship from me in the lead up to it. After the Mormek fight, the fight I obviously wanted was the Macronelli fight. But I said in the post-fight press conference, okay, that's it. I'm retiring from the cruiserweight. I can't make the limit anymore. I nearly killed myself. I was so dehydrated going into this fight. That's why I nearly got knocked out in the 4th round and got knocked down. It had nothing to do with my weight. It was just because Mormek was a very good puncher and he hit me with a shot I didn't see. That's why I was put down. But everybody was like, okay, David can barely make the weight. I really hammed up how I struggled, which then made Frank Warren at the time, who was Enzo Macronelli, the WBO champion, think, okay, his boy's got a chance of unifying the division. David can barely make the weight, and that's one of the main reasons I believe they took that fight, is because they believed I was a shell of the real me, and they were very, very wrong. And I proved that. I was eating fine. I came in over 2 pounds under the cruiserweight limit, and I got on the scales, and I looked $1 million, and I think that's when everybody really thought, oh, I think we may have miscalculated here. And I just said, I actually had a drink as I was getting onto the scales, so I knew I was way under the weight. And I think it proved to people that, you can't sort of judge a book by its cover, and there's always gamesmanship in boxing. Just because I'm saying I'm struggling at the weight and I can't make it and it's going to kill me to get down to the weight, you can't really listen to what boxers say all the time. But they made a mistake, and I knocked him out in 2 rounds as predicted. To sort of for me, that fight against Enzo Macronelli was a real true homecoming. As my fight against Mormek, I only had, I think it was like 10 tickets for the fight. They were given to the promoter in France, and the tickets were not on public sale. So I think I got allocated 10 tickets. That's it for my first world title fight. So I wanted a homecoming fight, and we fought at the O2 Arena, or the Millennium Stadium it was called then, and it was fantastic, a full house. The fight didn't start till I think 2 a.m. in the morning to satisfy Showtime television in America, and it was such a great atmosphere walking out there into South London as the number one in the division, fighting another Brit, to unify all the belts. And it really did, for me, that was a real nice moment, because people believed it was a 50-50 fight. All the experts said, McInerney was on a good long run of form. He had like 10 WBO title defences, and he had the big promotional machine behind him in Frank Warren.
Frank Warren said he'd give up promoting.
He did. He said if
McInerney lost.
If McInerney said he didn't quite fulfill that prediction, but it just showed how confident people were in Enzo Maccarinelli, and why that fight was sort of sticking in their minds for years to come. It was an explosive first round, and in the second round I hit him with about 20 unanswered punches in the corner, and he was all over the shop. And for me, that was okay. I've done it now. I've achieved all the belts I can get. Now let's move up to the heavyweight division.
And the platform for that win was provided by the win against Mormek, but not just for what you did against Maccarinelli, but then went on to beat Nikolai Valuev for the heavyweight title, and to do what you're doing now, to come right up to date, to be boxer and promoter. It's given you the platform to choose your own path.
It has, and that was one thing that I wanted to do from day dot, is to kind of control your own destiny. I've known too many professional boxers over the years who have been sort of pinned down in contracts they're unhappy with. When a fighter first turned professional, most fighters come from humble beginnings. So if you say to a fighter, if you win a world title, I'll give you £100,000. You say that to any 18-year-old kid, he'll think, £100,000? The little council flat I live in doesn't cost that. I thought, yeah, of course I'll sign it. They sign a contract when they're 18 years old, £100,000 for a world title fight. But 3 years later, they're filling up the O2 Arena. They're making 10 million on pay-per-view. That 100,000 deal that you sign when you're 18, when you're 22, 23 now, doesn't look that attractive, particularly when your opponent is getting $1 million. And I've seen it happen time and time again. And I didn't want to be one of those guys. So I believe I've always got my market value. I've always been independent. I've never signed long-term deals with people. It's always been a short-term thing. So I've kind of backed myself. For instance, the Mormek fight, I only received less than $150,000 for that fight. And when I was offered more than that, I was offered, I think, around 250 to fight Enzo Maccarinelli. Prior to that, I turned that down because I wanted to fight the number one in the division, a guy who was actually tougher than Maccarinelli. But I thought if I was to beat Mormek in Paris for the mandatory title, there's no options on me, meaning I was option free. I'll be a free agent, and I could then go to the Enzo Maccarinelli fight as the real champion, as the number one, which means I could dictate the terms of that fight. And coincidentally, I got close to $1 million, whereas I was only offered around 200,000 and then locked in for another 5 fights. So I could have had 5 fights for the same money I got for the one fight against Maccarinelli, and I walked